Brad Logan from Bleav In Ole Miss and Inside the Rebels is our guest. Everyone knows that every guest that we bring on the show is brought to you by our good friends over at betonline.ag, the world's most trusted betting platform and number one service for all things football. Go over there, use that promo code Bleav50 at checkout. You'll get a 50% off welcome bonus on your first deposit. Brad Logan, good to have you in here, my man. How are you?
I'm doing well, Blake. Thanks for having me on. It's a fun week. It's a fun week in Oxford. I know it's a fun week all across the state of Louisiana. This is a big one. Dates back to the crazy game in 1959 with the kick return from Billy Cannon.
Yes.
We've had some crazy games between the two programs, and something crazy is going to happen on Saturday. I have no doubt about it.
Oh, no doubt about it. I mean, every time that these two teams get together, there's always something that crazy happens. You know, I remember – what was it in 2012 or 13, the late game, Leonard Fournette, I think Ole Miss had just come off of beating Alabama and the craziness of that game. But there's been a lot of really, really good games, as you mentioned, that have been inside Tiger Stadium and at Ole Miss with these two teams. Brad, I just got to jump right out here and ask you, Trey Harris. So he got hurt last week, okay, and I think what everybody is asking is what is his status going into this game?
Well, Blake, I'll tell you like I've told every show that I've been on this week, and I was in the press box. We saw Trey Harris go down. We got nothing from the Ole Miss radio network. When he went down, he was helped off the field by Ole Miss personnel. One of them happened to be a physician. He's walking around. They're looking at that lower right leg. Takes him into the injury tent. I'm watching through my binoculars. He comes out, sets his helmet on top of one of the areas, and begins to walk around. Does not come back into the game. Begins to run, Blake. Was running up and down the sideline. Gets on the stationary bike. He's along with Ole Miss personnel once again. And everyone in the press box is kind of monitoring him. Obviously, he did not come back out in the second half. Lane does not talk about injuries at all. But he was asked about Trey Harris and his availability and everything. And, of course, he admitted he doesn't talk about injuries on Monday at the press availability. But he did say if we played today, Trey Harris would not be available. That tells me a lot that he's going through injury protocol. We don't know what the injury is. We just know it's on the lower right leg just by what we saw from the press box when we were in Columbia, South Carolina this past week. And we do not know of his availability as of today.
Brad, if you had to bet all the money on Bet Online if he plays, your opinion, do you think he goes or that he doesn't?
I think he goes, and that's strictly Brad Logan's opinion. We've seen Trey Harris deal with a number of injuries over the last couple of years. The good news for Ole Miss, they've been minor injuries. They've not been debilitating for the season. It looked, Blake, just from my very uneducated eye, it looked like an ankle maybe. And then you can obviously at this point would be pure speculation as to how severe it would be. I know, Blake, from just by the number of years I've covered the sport, if someone has a high ankle sprain and is pretty severe and they're running up and down the sideline, it's not as severe as you think. Right. So one would think a whole week of treatment. I don't know if he goes the whole game, Blake, but I expect to see him, warming up and ready to go in Tiger Stadium in a couple of days.
So, look, Brad, we talked last week, me and you, on our SEC channel, and good to have you here on the mothership, I guess as we'll call it. But we both went into the game last week, and you talked about wanting to see Ole Miss respond. I think they did. When you look at the game and now looking into previewing this game, how do you view it? Like, now you're coming off a win, you bounce back. How do you view coming into this game versus LSU?
Well, I think there's a couple things at play here. Number one, I was actually in the green room while you were talking about Ole Miss's offense, and there were a lot of things you said, Blake, that I agree with. We have not seen the Jackson Dart that we saw last year so far. Now, he did not play well in the first couple of games, missed some balls, but against Wake Forest, then against Kentucky, played better last week against South Carolina. But I think probably everyone that covers the sport has seen, or covers Ole Miss, has seen Jackson Dart has not progressed, has not played as well as we would have liked to have seen him play, I think, if you're an Ole Miss fan. So where does it go from here? A lot of that is simply because you lose a running back in Quinshon Judkins to Ohio State. Then you have a really good running back that you made mention a moment ago, Henry Parrish Jr. He's done a really good job this year. but there hasn't been a top-notch backup like we had last year with Ulysses Bentley. That's been a question we've asked Lane Kiffin. That's been a question we've asked basically every week. What is the status of Ulysses Bentley? He has yet to get a significant carry the last 6 games. And that's something we just don't know. We do not believe it's an injury situation. We do not believe it's a discipline situation. So what is it? We don't know. Well, is that somewhere that Billy may be factoring into the game against LSU on Saturday? It's definitely something I'll be monitoring in the stadium to see when he warms up, where is he at in the pecking order, and will we see him other than on the kickoff return team? So that is an area that I'm interested to see. You made mention also of the offensive line. I will tell you that there have been substantial injuries across the offensive front, which means when there's injuries, Blake, no matter how good these offensive linemen are, if there's no cohesiveness and there's no gelling, then that's cause of concern. And that's something I think has played into Jackson Dart not playing as well as we've seen him play, specifically the latter part last year. The good news for Ole Miss is they're getting Caleb Warren back. He warmed up last week against South Carolina, played sparingly when center Reese McIntyre went down. Secondly, we've seen Jerquan Scott. He dressed out. He warmed up, actually came into the game, and you made mention of J.J. Pegues a moment ago. On the goal line situation, he was an up back, and he was a blocking back. So he can be available as well. Probably will not see Jeremy James, although he worked out. He's been dealing with a broken bone in his right hand. Probably not going to be able to go, although, we don't know. It could be a situation where he plays with a club to protect that broken bone. And then you've got Jalen Williams, who's the starting left tackle, is dealing with what we've been told is an MCL sprain. It could be a pain tolerance issue with him. He did not dress. He did not play last week. I don't know if I could expect to see him today. The good news for Ole Miss, they've had 2 transfers out of Washington, Julius Buello and Nate Kalepo. They've been playing pretty well, anchoring both the right guard and right tackle spot. Diego Pounds, a transfer out of North Carolina, has played well. And, of course, Reese McIntyre stepped in and played well. But there's been a lot of rotation. I think that's hurt Ole Miss. Basically, Jackson Dart's going to have to play much better than he played last week simply because I expect LSU to bring pressure. Now, I know the stats, and you made mention too, the rushing stats defensively are much better than they have been. And I think on paper, you have to look at the competition that LSU has played. That should factor into why their deficiencies on defense are showing up specifically in the passing game in the defensive secondary. They played some really good teams throwing the ball. That's played a little bit into those numbers. I expect them to play much better, but I do believe there's some areas that Ole Miss can exploit at cornerback. I guess you could say P.J. Woodland, who I really like. I think he's going to be is already a really good cornerback. I think there's a situation where Ole Miss can take advantage of that. We'll have to see how things play out throughout the game. The key for Ole Miss, Blake, they must start opening the game with the running game. If LSU stuffs them and forces Ole Miss to go to the air early without solidifying a running game, I think that's going to be a big key for both Ole Miss and LSU, setting the tone for the game early.
Brad, Ole Miss has leaned on their defense. That has been their crutch. I think, Brad, for me, going into the season, I thought that Ole Miss would lean on the offense clearly early, but the defense had the potential to be really good with a really good D-line. It's been the opposite. They've been leaning on really good defense as the offense has worked on things. Brad, in your covering of Ole Miss, have they had a better defensive line than this one?
Maybe 1993 under Joe Lee Dunn when they had the number 1 defense in the country. Other than that, no. I mean, the thing about Ole Miss defensively this year is what makes them so good is it frees up their linebackers. Poop Hall, who's been really good the last couple of games.
Gave LSU problems in 22 too.
Yeah, and Kari Coleman has been good. And the reason they've been so good, Blake, is the defensive line has in many ways, Walter Nolan, Jared Ivey, has had to draw double teams, and that has freed up some linemen to get to the line. Has freed up those linebackers to make some plays. The deal that Ole Miss is going to have problems with is the offensive front for LSU is easily going to be the best one they've faced all year. I really like the play of Will Campbell. You got Garrett Dellinger has been around, Miles Frazier, Emory Jones Jr. There's a really good offensive line for LSU, and I think does a really good job protecting Nussmeier. I like Nussmeier a lot. I think he's been really good throwing the football this year. I watched a number of games this year completely. The situation he's got to find some receivers that are going to get separation, and that's been what I've seen has been an issue a little bit.
I agree.
I think he's been pretty accurate, and I like what he does. And the good news for LSU is their offensive line has been able to create a pocket. Now, you made mention of Pete Golding a moment ago, and I think you made some really good points. And one thing on the Nick Saban coaching tree, specifically defense, is they're not going to call holding or pass interference every play. So do your best to get your hands on the wide receivers and the tight end.
Right.
Unfortunately for Ole Miss against Kentucky, they called it a lot. And so it all really depends on what officiating crew you're going to get. Handsy is a great word. I haven't used that, Blake, but I'm going to borrow that this week and call Ole Miss's defense.
Oh, they're handsy
in the conference, and they've got issues at left corner. Isaiah Hamilton has been the starter. They have brought in Brandon Turney to transfer out of Tennessee, and of course he played at Alabama. They've just had issues there, and that has been exploited. We saw Barry and Brown get separation with Isaiah Hamilton. Not scores, but the big fourth down play, and that eventually would lead to Kentucky score. So there's been issues where John Saunders has rolled over the free safety to try to help out there. Chris Graves has been dealing with some injuries. So that's easily the part that LSU can be able to exploit. And you look at LSU's offense, and, Chris Hilton has had a pretty good year, but Kyron Lacey is the guy that Ole Miss is going to have to watch. He's a vertical threat. He's someone that can go up and get the football. And I think for Ole Miss, the question for me, Blake, is how much pressure is Pete Golding going to dial up? And if he dials it up, are you okay with putting Isaiah Hamilton or Brandon Turnage on an island on one-on-one coverage? And I don't think early he's going to try to do that. And the good news with Ole Miss, and maybe it's just because the opponent was South Carolina, but they really put the box in against Sellers in that offense of South Carolina. They really couldn't do anything. And, of course, he wasn't much of a throwing threat. I think we're going to see a lot of differences defensively for Ole Miss schematically simply because of the type of offense you're going to face. I expect, Brian Kelly, Lane Kiffin, by the way, I think they're really good friends. And I think they probably talk a lot. Maybe not this week, but I think during the season these guys have probably gone back and forth a little bit. I think Brian Kelly is a great coach, and I know Lane Kiffin thinks he's a great coach too. I have no doubt, Blake, that the interesting part for me, both these teams are in very similar positions because both have a path to the college football playoff. Mm-hmm. Both have an opportunity to make it to Atlanta, but I don't know if either of them can make it to Atlanta or the college football playoff losing this game on Saturday. That's why I think it's so important to both teams.
Brad, I think both of these teams, like, for example, Ole Miss is 24th in the country in rushing offense. And would you say that's been a weakness? Because, look, we look at – you're right. I look at, I want to look at stats, then I don't. Because, I look at the left boundary, and I'm like, look, man, if Kentucky can exploit it, Nussmeier and LSU can exploit it. I don't think that's – an issue. But then I look at the stats. I'm like, okay, they're 24th. And I think a lot of people look at Ole Miss in total offense and they're in the top 10 again. And I'm like, Brad, they're having issues running the football. When you look at this game, the biggest strength for Ole Miss is what? But the biggest weakness in this game is what, in your opinion?
The biggest strength for Ole Miss is Jackson Dart. Even though he hasn't played as good as we know he can play, I do believe that this is a game in which he can absolutely shine. He shined last year. We saw him go toe-to-toe with LSU, and the Ole Miss defense wasn't as good as last year, but I think the LSU offense was maybe better than last year. Mm-hmm. We'll see. I admit, last year was a game in which it's just one of those things where you say it's just Ole Miss and LSU. It's just a crazy game. And so I think definitely for Ole Miss, having Jackson Dart in your corner. But the problem for Ole Miss, Blake, is I don't know necessarily that you lost Quinshon Judkins, but I think it's a compound of not having him and then not having a serviceable backup other than Matt Jones, who is a walk-on from the Jackson metro area, who was a service team running back the last couple of years. and now nowhere to be found is Ulysses Bentley, who, by the way, Ulysses Bentley was, according to Pro Football Focus, was going to be one of the top running backs in the SEC this year and has not had a substantial carry. So I think that is definitely a pro for Ole Miss. A weakness, Blake, I just have to say it's got to be the left side or the left cornerback for Ole Miss. There's no doubt about it. That's the issue at hand.
Brad, your game prediction, and how do you come to that game prediction on who do you think wins this game and how?
I said during the summer I expect Ole Miss to have a little bit better roster than Ole Miss than LSU. I'm sorry, this year, and simply because I think looking at the defensive line, Ole Miss just looks really good across that defensive front. And so I think the line right at I think BetOnline had it at 2.5 for Ole Miss. I think that's kind of where I would take it, maybe 27-24, maybe 31-28. But I'm picking Ole Miss to win in a close one simply because I think they're going to win the line of scrimmage because of that defensive front. Although I've said all along, there's two offensive linemen for LSU that'll be playing on Sunday, and it's going to be the best offensive front that they have faced. So it is going to be an absolute war. If you told me anything could happen and you gave me a scenario down in Baton Rouge, Blake, I would believe it. It's the most fun place to watch a football game. I love going to LSU at night. It is an incredible atmosphere. It has everything that you want in a college football atmosphere: the pageantry, the band, the fans, the gumbo, the smell, the feeling. It is college football 101. And I love Tiger Stadium, and I cannot wait for Saturday night.
Yeah, I retweeted your thing from earlier today when the band came out. I thought that was really good. You know, Brad, the one good thing about our business is, man, you can go. You can go and travel and go to these SEC games and on the road. Brad Logan, Inside the Rebels, Bleav in Ole Miss. I know they know, but just in case they don't, where can they catch all your stuff, buddy?
Yeah, the Twitter/X hub is at Brad Logan COTE. But, of course, we'd love for you to follow us on Inside the Rebels. That's, of course, Rebels 247.